Hey there folks, and welcome to this video. Here I'm going to be talking about the WRC. The next generation of World Rally Car is right around the corner. With the 2022 regulations soon to be upon us, we are yet to find out which teams and which cars will be competing the calendar. Now we've heard rumours. Dirtfish this week supposedly leaked a Ford Puma World Rally car. And a few months ago I started making a list of 10 cars I'd like to see. The first one was the Puma. So let's sit back, let's have a discussion, and here are 10 picks that I have for the next generation of World Rally Car. Let's start off with discussing the one that I've talked about, the Ford Puma. Now, Ford Puma is something that is actually quite well known in the world of rallying. It did the JWRC in the early stages of the championship before being replaced by the Fiesta, so it'll be quite funny to see the Fiesta being replaced by the Puma. We did hear a Dirtfish article with David Evans where he said that Mickelson was going to be helping M Sport develop a 2022 Puma World Rally car, and I'd be quite looking forward to it. If you think back to the early noughties when the Puma was actually in the WRC, the likes of the people driving it were, well, quite popular, let's say. You heard the likes of Chris Meek and Guy Wilkes, who were going to be the up-and-coming stars of British rallying. Now, Meek is still there or thereabouts, working with Toyota, for example. Wilkes has gone more over to the Rallycross now, but it'd be quite cool to see the likes of the Puma come back to the WRC. Next up on the list, and let's talk Hyundai. Now, it is quite likely they're going to go with the i20 and probably the N edition, because that's almost the homologation special. But have a think about this. Hayden Paddon developed the Kona, which is going to be an electric rally car. Could Hyundai, with the thing about SUVs becoming the standard, and in light of the Ford Puma, bring the Kona to the WRC? That's something that I'm thinking about, potentially. There could also be the involvement of someone like Kia as a manufacturer instead, but with Hyundai being the reigning manufacturers champions and having been manufacturers champions the year before, I'd be quite surprised if we ended up losing them, especially if they were being replaced with another brand. As for the likes of Toyota, well, again, it seems like it's probably going to be the Yaris, and potentially the Gazoo Racing Yaris. But I've got another suggestion. How about the Toyota Corolla? Now, this is something that is still being raced around the world. We see it in Britain with the British Touring Car Championship, and the Speedworks Motorsport entry that run it are now going to be competing under the banner of Toyota Gazoo Racing UK. So that could mean that we might see a WRC Corolla again at some point. That would be nostalgic, and, well, its last spate was quite successful, wasn't it? Now, my next one is a company that I think will return to the WRC, and I reckon it'll be PSA. Now, PSA are currently in the middle of a merger with FCA, so Fiat Chrysler, so I'm not thinking we're going to see any of those Fiat Chrysler vans, so sadly no Lancia for us, but I reckon PSA will make the return, and I reckon it might not be Citroën. I reckon it'll be Peugeot, taking Dakar machinery across to the WRC. Now, as to which of the crossover SUVs they pick, I'm not so sure. In the background you can see a 3008, but I was thinking maybe the 2008, slightly shorter, and I've got to say a bit more aesthetically appealing. The 3008 looks a bit more futuristic, but the 2008 I think looks more like a rally car. Even though the most recent Dakar car is the 3008. And likewise, the next one that we're going to be talking about is going to be a returning manufacturer, and is going to be an SUV. Let's say Subaru come back to the WRC. That would be amazing. Like the Japanese influence, seeing Toyota there at the higher levels, could bring Subaru back. And I reckon it would be the Subaru XV, which in other markets I believe is the Crosstrek. We've seen it in the States doing rallying. So I wouldn't necessarily rule it out coming back to the WRC, and especially if these new regulations mean that, well, the space frame can be sized down accordingly. This is why there are so many SUVs, by the way. There's the space frame kind of regulations, which means that manufacturers could, in theory, shrink down SUVs to be within the regulation sizes and still be competitive, not having to worry about a big, cumbersome figure of a car. But from here, we're going to be talking about some of the smallest cars on the supposed list that I've got. And we're going to be looking at the Volkswagen Auto Group and Skoda. I reckon the Fabia could make a WRC return. Now, the reason why was when I was writing this, we saw the Fabia still being dominant in the WRC 2 and 3 series. But, at the same time, we now have the Volkswagen Group returning to motorsports with propulsion other than electric. Of course, we are seeing Audi pulling out of Formula E, but they have revealed a new TCR. And in addition to that, we hear that Porsche and Audi are going to be going back to endurance racing. So there is every chance that the Volkswagen Group could return to something like the WRC, and I reckon the Fabia would be the best way to do that. Imagine though, that would be something that would be pretty cool to see, especially given their last run, albeit not eventually as successful as they would have intended, did yield some positivity. And then, let's have a look at another brand, and another French brand that I reckon could return to WRC. Renault. And this is probably the smallest car on the list, though I'm not so sure. The Clio. Now, this might seem a bit of a far-fetched thing, and I'll explain why. Because since I started making this stuff, they've been making a switch more over to Alpine. But I'd be surprised if the Rally GT A110 came across to the WRC itself. I don't think that there's really that much kind of demand for it. But I reckon something like a Clio could potentially come back. At the same time, maybe Dacia. You've got things like the Duster and maybe the Logan. But I wouldn't be surprised to see the likes of Renault back in the WRC. And when we're talking about these kinds of brands being owned by other brands, let's talk about Geely. Now, the Chinese brand has got several different marks under its name. You could see the likes of Polestar. You could see the likes of Proton, who have done recent rallying. Or we could see something a bit like Mini. Now, Mini came back with ProDrive, having had quite a long break from rallying and not really having taken place in the WRC. I reckon Geely could try and do the same thing with Volvo. Volvo hasn't been in the WRC really ever. Like, it's the early stages of the WRC you would have seen a Volvo competing in the category. So I reckon we'd see Volvo back. And in terms of cars, maybe something like an XC40. Something smaller, you know? That could do the trick. And sticking with talking about brands out in China, MG. And I mean, I've been talking about the Fabia and the Clio probably being some of the smaller side entries on the list. This might actually be the smallest. Something like the MG3. Like, that would be something that says, oh, this is a cheap, affordable car, and it's robust, and it goes rallying. I mean, that's what we saw with a lot of the 90s WRC. That's why I'm thinking that something like that could be the case. And to round off this list, to talk about a 10th car, let's say Mitsubishi. Now, of course, Mitsubishi as a brand, it is quite closely linked to the likes of Renault and, at the same time, Nissan. But Mitsubishi, Donut did a video recently talking about Mitsubishi don't care what you think. That's why they did what they did with the WRC previously. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's how they came back to rallying. You've got something like the PHEVs, the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and stuff like the Outlander, still quite a popular car. So when it comes to SUVs, they could scale it down. When it comes to hybrids, they've already got that kind of investment. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Mitsubishi back in the WRC. At the same time, there were a few more that I had considered. I mean, I've talked about some of them like Dacia, Kia, Citroen. I did also think maybe somewhere like Tata or Chevrolet, but I don't know. I've got all of these different kinds of thoughts going around in my head, and now I hand it over to you. If we're talking WRC, what do you think could be the future of it? Because these are some of my suggestions, and I mean, it's very likely that one of these could come true, the Puma, but some of these ones don't seem too far-fetched. So do you think any of these could be the case? Do you think we could see a return to, say, 99, 2000, when we had the likes of Ford, Hyundai, Toyota, Peugeot, Subaru, Skoda, and Mitsubishi? We could, in my opinion, but let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.